The dawn crept softly through the curtains, hesitating as if unsure about heralding a new day. Samuel had been awake for hours, a prisoner to his own thoughts, unable to recall the last time he had savored a full night's sleep without interruption. He lay in bed, feeling the chill of the sheets against one side of his body, as if his presence in that space were more of an accident than a conscious choice. Beside him, Elizabeth slept soundly, her breathing slow and steady, completely oblivious of the tempest swirling within his mind. Turning toward her, Samuel observed her in the dim light that filtered through the curtains. She wore that familiar serene expression, one he had seen countless times before, especially after an argument. It was the same look she bore after her voice had risen above his, leaving him feeling smaller than he ever thought possible. Elizabeth had this uncanny ability to find peace in sleep, as if the harsh words she had directed at him the night prior had vanished like mist, leaving no trace of their impact. Her indifference to the aftermath of their conflicts was striking, as if the reasons for their fights, often trivial matters like forgetting to take out the trash or a delayed text response, were inconsequential in her mind. The mechanics of their arguments remained consistent. Elizabeth would raise her voice, her laughter tinged with derision, looking at him as though he were a clumsy child in need of reprimand. "God, Sammy, how can you be so useless?" she had exclaimed one evening when he forgot to buy milk on his way home from work, her tone dripping with impatience. "Sometimes I wonder how you even survived before you met me." He had simply replied, "I just forgot the milk, Elizabeth." But for her, that was the crux of the issue. He forgot everything, from bills to promises, requiring her constant reminders about how to function as a partner. That night, he chose silence, recognizing the futility of defending himself. Each attempt he made was met with ridicule. Her words sliced through his defenses, honing in on his vulnerabilities like a knife. "You can't even win an argument, Samuel. How pathetic." Initially, he convinced himself that this was simply her personality, that every marriage faces trials and that sharp words were part of cohabitation. He told himself that love could endure imperfections, that he had grown to love her despite her rough edges. Yet, over time, he felt something within him begin to fracture, the weight of her disdain pressing down on him like a heavy cloak. He noticed how Elizabeth transformed in public. She became charming and witty, engaging in conversations with an effortless confidence that he could only admire from a distance. In these moments, she smiled and joked, holding his hand affectionately, traits that starkly contrasted with the belittlement he suffered in private. One night at a friend's house, when asked about an important work project, Elizabeth interrupted with a light laugh. "Oh, don't pressure him too much. He's not really the type to give long speeches." The group laughed along with her, oblivious to his humiliation. Even when he attempted to steer the conversation back, she dismissed him with a sigh, saying, "Oh, sweetheart, that's not how it is, but don't worry, it's a complicated topic." The laughter that followed reinforced the painful message. He was not smart enough to engage in conversation. It became clear to him that these humiliations were not mere accidents or moments of frustration. They were a calculated design. Elizabeth needed to diminish him, for in her world, control was paramount. He had allowed it to happen, the slow erosion of his self-esteem embedded in each sharp remark and dismissive laughter. That night, as they drove home, Samuel remained silent, but the shift inside him was undeniable. This was not a result of a single argument, but rather the culmination of years of small wounds that left no visible scars, transforming him into a man he barely recognized. The following morning, before Elizabeth awoke, he slipped out of bed and descended the stairs quietly, each step measured, as if he were already a stranger in that house. On the dining room table, the same one where he had endured countless conversations cloaked in insults, he placed a folder containing divorce papers. He stood there for a moment, staring at it, devoid of anger or sadness. Instead, a profound certainty washed over him, as though he reclaimed something lost long ago, his agency, his voice, and his right to define his own existence. He did not expect Elizabeth to understand or to make an effort to mend things. She did not know how to lose. She would be bewildered when he reclaimed control in the most significant way, by leaving her with no one left to undermine. As the clock struck 7, he knew she would soon descend the stairs. Samuel glanced around the dining room, feeling a strange detachment. Everything bore her touch, from the dark furniture she chose, dismissing lightwood as cheap, to the framed landscapes she insisted on hanging, claiming they added class to the home. Even the fresh flowers in a vase were always perfect, replaced before they could wither, as if the thought of imperfection was intolerable in her carefully curated world. He poured himself a cup of coffee and settled into his usual chair, waiting not out of uncertainty, but to witness her reaction when she discovered the papers. Minutes later, Elizabeth appeared in the kitchen, her satin robe accentuating her messy hair. Her movements were automatic as she poured herself a cup of coffee, her gaze sweeping past him without acknowledgement. Then her eyes landed on the folder. Samuel observed the precise moment her mind processed its contents. Her back stiffened, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time in a long while, she seemed at a loss for words. "What is this?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. He took his time, savoring a sip of coffee as the tension thickened in the room. Divorce papers. A heavy silence enveloped them, stretching uncomfortably. Instead of the expected anger or outrage, Elizabeth let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "You're joking." "I'm not." She picked up the folder delicately, as if it might burn her, flipping to the pages without truly reading them. Samuel noticed her jaw tighten, the disbelief etched across her features. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," he replied, his tone steady, unwavering. Elizabeth snapped the folder shut, her expression shifting to one of disbelief and contempt. "Is this because of something I said? Are you really going to make a scene just because you can't handle an adult conversation?" There was the familiar tactic to minimize the situation, to shift blame onto him, as if his decision were merely a reaction to her words rather than a reflection of years of emotional turmoil. Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, feeling a calmness envelop him, a stark contrast to the chaos of their conflicts. "You said no one else would put up with me." She blinked, caught off guard, but he pressed on, refusing to let her interrupt. "Well, now you don't have to put up with me either." For the first time since their relationship began, Elizabeth had no retort. Her usual sharp went dulled by the weight of the moment. Samuel watched, committing to memory the instant when the control she wielded over him crumbled before her eyes. It had been remarkably simple. All he had to do was stop participating in her game. 2 weeks prior, he had made the decision when he scheduled a meeting with his lawyer. "I want a divorce." The lawyer had looked up from his papers, assessing him with an analytical gaze that had likely encountered hundreds of men in similar situations. "Have you talked to her about this?" "No, she won't take it well." The lawyer nodded knowingly, as if he had heard this story countless times before. "Physical abuse?" Samuel shook his head. "No, but emotional." The words caught his throat for a moment, the truth of them unfamiliar yet undeniable. "Yes." The lawyer then began explaining the legal process, but Samuel barely listened, consumed by thoughts of the years he had endured. He realized with dawning clarity that he had always possessed the right to leave, to seek a life unburdened by the weight of someone else's contempt. As he sat at the dining table, watching Elizabeth struggle for words, he knew he had made the right choice. There were no shouts, no pleas, no dramatics, yet her stare, the tension in her posture, the way her fingers drummed against the table, all conveyed pure, restrained venom. "You're making a mistake." Samuel offered her a faint smile, a gesture of finality. "Maybe, but it's not your problem anymore." He grabbed his coat and walked out of the house without looking back, not waiting to witness her sign the papers or to hear her last attempt to wound him with words. The crisp morning air hit his face as he crossed the street, and for the first time in years, he felt he could breathe freely, unencumbered by the shadows of his past. In that moment, he embraced the possibility of a new beginning, one that belonged solely to him.